webinar is not true. There's all kinds of opportunities to speak up for housing. And if you're a member and you get our newsletters and you get our emails, sometimes our relentless emails, it gives you all kinds of ways to speak up for housing. However, speaking up for housing once in a decade as part of the housing element process of the general plan is a really, really powerful way for residents to get engaged in the planning of their city, what it looks like, what it feels like, the opportunities that are there, and particularly around housing. And now there are teeth to the housing element, to the general plan. And so it's even more exciting and it makes you even more powerful. So I'm excited about having this webinar tonight. And with that, I'm going to sign off and turn it over to Policy Director Callum Weeks so he can kick things off and introduce our amazing panelists. Thanks for being here. Take it away, Callum.
Thanks so much, Jen, and welcome everyone. So excited to have you here with us tonight. I am going to jump right into it. I'm really delighted to have Aaron Eckhouse, the Regional Policy Director for California YIMBY, joining us tonight. He is a guru of all things related to housing and housing elements, and we're just so thankful that he was able to participate tonight. Aaron grew up in Iowa after his parents were forced out of the Bay Area by high housing costs and underfunded public schools. He moved to California 2 years ago, where he was taken by the beautiful landscape, as are we all, amazing produce, and obscenely high rent. He is excited to apply his organizing experience from the 2012 Obama campaign and his YIMBY experience with East Bay for Everyone to the task of ending California's housing shortage. Aaron, again, thank you so much for joining us tonight and imparting some of your knowledge. You have the virtual floor.
Thank you, Callum. Very excited to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about housing elements, favorite topic, and I gotta get a bio on our website updated. I've been here 6 years now. Feels time flies. All right, I'm gonna try. Let me pull up a quick presentation here. Everybody see this? All right. So let's talk about the housing element process and why this is such an important and exciting opportunity. What is the housing element? A housing element is a component of the city's general plan. And it's required by the state that every city update their housing element every 8 years to demonstrate that they have the capacity to meet the housing needs of their population over that time period. I'm going to talk about some of the key components of the housing element that you should be aware of as you engage in advocacy on it. But this is a chance for the city to take a big picture view of their housing needs, what housing policies they have that are working well, what housing policies they have that are maybe not working so well and should be updated or replaced or removed entirely. And it's a chance for you to push them to do this with both accountability from the state. The state is going to be reviewing every city's housing element to make sure it's consistent with state law and with our need to address the housing crisis. And I know all of us probably who have advocacy experience have encountered the situation where cities just punt and punt and punt. And sometimes it feels like the easiest thing for them to do is nothing. And the great thing about a housing element is that's less of an option. Cities have to update their housing element. They can face consequences from the state if they fail to do that. They have a deadline for doing that. And so this is a great chance for us to use that as leverage to get housing policies in our community improved. So one of the most important parts of the housing element, and one that gets a lot of attention, is the sites inventory. This is a list of properties where the city thinks that they can accommodate housing growth. The total zone capacity in the sites inventory has to add up to a quantity that's set through the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process, RHNA. Some of you may have heard about RHNA. There's a big process over the last couple of years in the Bay Area to determine that allocation for every city. That's based on an allocation that went to the entire region. Overall, the Bay Area has to plan for about 450,000 new homes over the next 8 years. And every jurisdiction in the region has gotten a share of that. broken down into 4 income buckets: very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. In the sites inventory, the key difference there is low and very low income sites have to be zoned for a minimum density. That's 20 or 30 dwelling units per acre, depending on the size of the jurisdiction. But in order to be counted in the low or very low income inventory, they have to meet that minimum density. New this cycle, this is something that has been upgraded from the past, is also the state wants cities to look at what is the viability of this site for development. Is there a current use there that is going to impede the prospects of building housing there? You know, if it's the only grocery store in town, are we really gonna tear down the only grocery store in town to build an apartment building? That seems less likely. If it's a strip mall where half the stores are vacant, that's a more viable site. But cities are supposed to distinguish between vacant sites and non-vacant sites. Most cities are going to have to be looking at a lot of non-vacant sites. You know, a parking lot is a non-vacant site. That derelict strip mall is still a non-vacant site. And when they're relying on non-vacant sites to meet their sites inventories, cities have to do this analysis of what is the likelihood, is there substantial evidence that the current use on that site is going to be discontinued for redevelopment into housing. And that's something where local advocates can provide really valuable context to cities and to the state in terms of looking at, hey, you know, I know that site. I don't think the owner is going to be interested in replacing the current use. Or, yeah, I know that site and I think that's a really good place for housing. The other key thing in the sites inventory with all things real estate, right, is the location of those sites. Are they being planned near amenities, whether that's public transit or core necessary retail or job opportunities? Are they being planned in areas that are providing opportunities to the people who live there, economic opportunity, educational opportunity, environmental opportunities? You know, is this right next to the freeway or some other polluting use, or is it in a nicer part of town? And that also determines the viability, right? But this is a chance to determine what ways do we want our cities to grow. And so we want to be steering away from sprawl and toward transit and amenity and opportunity oriented development. Another key part of the housing element is a list of programs and policies, where every city is supposed to be identifying policy changes that they're going to make that will help meet their housing needs. This is a chance in cities where there are pro-housing members of council or pro-housing staff to break out your housing policy wish list and to say, hey, you know, I think it would be really great if we got rid of minimum parking requirements or allowed ministerial approval of developments that include affordable housing, or allowed a greater diversity of housing types in some of our neighborhoods, like fourplexes or sixplexes or cottage courts. These are policies that can be about all of the 3 Ps: production, preservation, protection. I think Janae is going to talk more about the 3 Ps framework, but all, you know, this doesn't have to only be about housing production. Production is a core part of the housing element, but you can push for tenant protection policies. You can push for housing preservation, affordable housing preservation policies as part of the housing element. And all of this should be connected to another required part of the housing element, which is an analysis of government constraints on housing. The city is required to do an analysis of like, hey, these are the things that we do that are an obstacle to housing production in the city. And so some of the NIMBYer cities, and I know that they are out there, they exist. If there are things you know the city is doing that are a problem for housing production, a barrier to affordable housing, you can really push to have those included in the analysis of constraints. And then you can push the city to say, hey, you've identified this as a barrier to meeting your housing needs. What are you going to do to change that? And that's something that the state is really looking for, that they have dinged cities for in Southern California, is if they identify a constraint and don't identify a plan to address it. Or if they identify a constraint and then they say, well, we're going to consider removing this constraint or mitigating this constraint. And the state has really been pushing on cities, no, like, you should have concrete plans where you make a commitment to changing policies in order to address these constraints on development that are preventing you from meeting your housing needs. All of this needs to be done through the context of affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is a requirement that has been strengthened in housing elements in recent years. It's a recurring theme. Actually, the housing element process has existed in California for a long time. It historically has not been very effective at actually getting cities to allow production of enough housing to meet our needs. So the state has gone through and updated a lot of the requirements. One of them that they've really strengthened is this requirement to affirmatively further fair housing. And cities are required to do an analysis of fair housing and of how they're going to affirmatively further fair housing in their housing element. But they should also be approaching every other piece of the housing element with this context of trying to actively address segregation, removing barriers to opportunity, and investing in places where there are lower resources and there's a need to support those communities. So, the sites inventory, cities should look at how they're distributing affordable housing opportunity sites through the community. If they're all concentrated in one part of the city, maybe a neighborhood that is less white or higher poverty, that's a problem. They should be ensuring that there are affordable housing opportunity sites in every part of the city, including wealthier neighborhoods, neighborhoods with, maybe the best performing public schools or the best access to economic opportunities. Similarly, the programs and policies that cities implement should include policies that are specifically oriented toward affirmatively furthering fair housing and to breaking down barriers that keep people out of, that prevent people from accessing opportunity. And this is, again, something that the state has really pushed cities in Southern California, which is ahead of us in this process on, is to make sure that they are changing the status quo. If you're going to affirmatively further fair housing, you can't just double down on the same things you've been doing, because the status quo is not fair. It is unjust. And so cities need to be really looking at active policy changes. And the good news is we have help from the state to hold cities accountable to that. This is not just a process where cities can do whatever they want and nobody is watching. The State Department of Housing and Community Development is going to review every one of these housing elements for consistency with state law, whether that's affirmatively furthering fair housing or having viable sites that have where it's realistic to expect potential to develop housing on them. HCD, however, has been very clear that they cannot do that accountability work on their own. They need help from all of us to make sure that they have the local context they need to evaluate cities' housing elements, whether that is telling them about the local conditions that are creating barriers to housing production, barriers to affordable housing, barriers to fair housing, whether that's telling them about conditions on specific sites that make them more or less suitable for housing. Every time you're communicating with your city about the housing element process, it's appropriate to copy HCD. And it's appropriate to contact HCD directly if you feel like your city is not living up to the standards that we need for addressing our housing crisis in California. The last thing I'll say about accountability here is accountability doesn't end when your city submits their final housing element to HCD in January of 2023, which is the deadline. HCD has been clear that they view housing elements as a contract between that city and the people of California. And your city should be making commitments in their housing element to implement policy changes, maybe to do rezonings. And so it's important that we continue to stay engaged even after housing elements have been submitted and approved, which may take time. 90% of the cities in Southern California had their housing elements rejected on their first submission. Hopefully we'll do a better job than that in the Bay Area because we have had the opportunity to learn from them, and consultants who maybe were treating this as similar to past cycles hopefully have learned from that as well. But it doesn't end when the housing element gets approved. We then need to hold cities accountable to the commitments that they make in housing elements and make sure that they're implementing policy changes in a way that advances all of these goals of abundant and affordable and fair housing. I'm going to turn things back over to Cal, but there's going to be opportunity for asking all sorts of questions later. And this is a really exciting opportunity, I think, for us to shape the next decade of housing policy in our communities. But it's not going to work unless we are engaged in that process and making sure cities are doing what they need to do.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Just one quick thing that I would ask, could you define for everyone, in case it's not abundantly clear for all the folks present today, what ministerial means?
Yeah, so ministerial is an approval process that doesn't involve a discretionary decision by the local government. So you have a defined set of rules, and a development proposal that meets that defined objective standard will be approved at the staff level. The most prominent ministerial approval process in California right now is through Senate Bill 35. And that establishes a ministerial process for qualifying developments, but cities might want to expand the scope of which developments are subject to ministerial approval. There are a lot of benefits that can come from that. We're seeing a few cities, including Sacramento, has done this at the local level.
And then one other quick thing, because it's germane to the conversation right now. Say a city does everything possible to create the conditions necessary for developers to come in and actually build, but nothing gets built. What, if anything, will happen then?
Yeah, so the housing element is primarily a planning exercise, and cities have to show that they have a plan to accommodate potential development. That's what they're held most accountable to. I will say, I'm sympathetic to cities, but I also think if you're finding that there's not development happening in your city, you should revisit your policies again and see maybe there are more barriers that you could address, or maybe you need to find a local funding source. The main accountability measure that cities face if they fail to actually build the housing they need is they become subject to SB 35 and they lose discretion over certain development decisions.
Great. Well, that's all I have for now. We'll move along. Thanks so much, Ann. Really appreciate it. We'll get back to you in a short bit. Now I am delighted to invite Janae Aubrey. She is the Senior Policy Manager for Nonprofit Housing, otherwise known as NPH. They are an incredible team, and as of late, they've been working on some really terrific webinars that are aimed at helping folks get engaged in the local housing element process, and really to help educate them on how to approach getting engaged in housing, period. And with that, I'd just like to briefly introduce her. In July 2021, Janae Aubrey joined NPH as the Senior Policy Manager, where she leads regional policy advocacy for affordable housing. Janae was formerly the Director of Continuum of Care Strategies at Everyone Home, the backbone agency for Alameda County's Continuum of Care. Prior to Everyone Home, Janae was the Housing and Gender Justice Staff Attorney at Family Violence Law Center, where she engaged in policy and legislative advocacy, centering the needs of women of color experiencing homelessness. She has worked at various legal aid agencies to provide direct legal services to gender-based violence survivors and extremely low-income tenants. Again, Janae, thank you so much for being here. We always appreciate the strong leader of NPH in our housing circles. They are a leader and in many respects, the guiding light that carries us through each year. And so at this point, I would love to pass the reins over to you, and feel free to kick off your presentation.
Thank you so much, Cal, and thank you, Aaron, for such a really broad overview of what the housing element is. It's a great setup for my presentation, which is focused on how all of you can get involved in the housing element process. I'm going to share my screen and get started. So as Cal mentioned, I work at NPH, or Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California. We're a membership-based organization here in the Bay. We advocate for affordable housing throughout the 9-county Bay Area region. And our vision really is to make sure that everyone in the Bay Area has a safe and stable place to call home, an affordable place to call home, no matter their race, their ethnicity, or their income, or any other aspect of their background. And we really do believe that affordable housing is really the foundation for achieving racial justice and economic justice. As Cal mentioned, I focus on our local and our regional policy work, and a lot of that work has been centered on the housing element for the last couple of months, just giving the urgency and the tight timeline. And as a part of the housing element work, we've been trying to develop some messaging strategies, some videos, and other resources to really help our members, who are mostly housing advocates and affordable housing developers, to get more folks from the community involved in this housing element process, to share their stories about what they want, what they need. So here's a short video that we developed. It's not finalized. You're the first to see it. So I'm just going to play it really quickly just to give some context for why the housing element is so important. I think Erin did a great job, but also want to share this video with you all. So that's very brief. We're going to develop even more videos to explain what the housing element is and give examples of what you can do to get involved, how you can speak at a public meeting, for example, and I'll talk more later. But just again, want to stress the urgency of this moment. Right now, we have that once in a decade chance to address our housing problems through this housing element process. This is something that happens every 8 years. So what's being decided right now, the policies that are being put in place, the sites that cities are selecting for where housing is going to go, we're going to be impacted that for years to come. So it's really important for everyone to speak up now, to share their stories. I mean, that's the only way that you're going to make sure that your city, your town, or your county will include your priorities in the housing element plan. And that's going to impact all of us, not just you, not just me, but the entire community, and it's going to impact our future as well. So please, please speak up. You're the expert. You are the expert on your story. We really, really do need you to get involved. And guess what? Cities and towns and counties want to hear what you have to say. They have to hear what you have to say. They're legally required to seek community engagement and to incorporate feedback that they get into their actual policy and plan. So here's some examples. Maybe now you get it. You've heard Erin speak. You've heard me speak about the importance and the urgency of this moment. And you say, hey, what can I actually do? How can I get involved in this? This slide has a couple of examples. It's not an exhaustive list of things that you can do, but it's some things that I've seen mostly happen across the 9 Bay Area. These are opportunities that I see pretty often. So public comment. You have the opportunity to speak at, say, like a city council meeting or a board of supervisors meeting or another meeting. Oftentimes there might be an option to speak online, so via Zoom, or you can call in on the phone if you're not tech savvy or you prefer speaking on the phone. Or there's often opportunities to speak in person. And you can also write if you don't have the time. Maybe you're tired, maybe you work late, or you're working at the time of these public meetings. You can write your public comments and send it in. Another opportunity is maybe a public workshop. Sometimes cities are going to like different public meetings, maybe even a farmer's market. They're showing up, they're tabling, and they're asking folks that are walking by, like, hey, can I get a moment of your time? Can you please tell me what you think our community needs right now? What kinds of housing do you need? What kinds of policies should we be passing? So, just please pick any of these opportunities to speak up and share your own personal story about how you're being impacted by what your city is doing and how your city is planning housing. Another opportunity I've been seeing is surveys, online surveys, and often there are incentives like gift cards and things like that to just complete a simple survey that will take maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Again, answering what are your housing needs and what do you want your community to be and to look like and to be inclusive. And then also another thing, please just talk to your friends and your family and your neighbors or even your coworkers about this process. You might not know what's going on. Just let them know, like, hey, this is what's happening. I heard this from Generation Housing. I heard this from YIMBY. I heard this from NPH. I think this is a really important time for us to speak up. You know what? There's a public comment opportunity tomorrow night. I think I'm going to go. Do you want to go too? It's really important for all of us to get involved because, like I said earlier, the decisions that are being made right now impact us all. So please just think of it as a conversation. It doesn't have to be anything formal or intimidating. Just think of it as a conversation with someone that you know and that you're comfortable with. So here's some sample language and a few tips to include for information to include in your public comment. So first, just your name. Then second, where you live, where you work. Third, can you name like your problem or your goal, and make it personal as possible. So like, this has happened to me. This has happened to my family member. This has happened to my neighbor. And then this is what I need. This is what my family needs. That's really powerful. And then have a specific ask. Let them know what you want. Is there a specific policy that you think is important for your city or town or county to pass? Is there a specific place where you think we need more housing or we need more affordable housing? Please include that in your public comment. And then I'll get into some more examples in the next few slides. And then finally, just end with a thank you. I think it's really important to have a respectful tone. It doesn't mean that you can't show your emotions. It doesn't mean that you can't be frustrated or angry. I am often frustrated and angry. It's okay to show that, but please keep it respectful because we don't want to kind of turn off our decision makers and have them dismiss what we have to say. So first, I'm going to give some context. Aaron alluded to this in his slides, the 3 Ps. It's a kind of a shorthand that most housing advocates use for housing policies, like housing policies that we want to advocate for. And it's, again, just a stress, it's not just one policy, it's not just one area that we're advocating for, it's for all 4 or all 3. So the 3 Ps typically stand for production. So of course, building more housing, but especially affordable housing in the case of MPH. Preservation, let's keep our existing housing, especially our affordable housing. Let's protect our renters and our residents from being evicted or priced out of the Bay Area. And then sometimes there's a 4th P from homeless service providers and advocates, prevention, prevent people from becoming homeless. So this isn't something that you have to remember or that you have to use, but I think it's a useful shorthand. So here's a concrete example of a policy that many Bay Area advocates are advocating for. It serves as both a protection and kind of a preservation policy. It's tenant opportunity to purchase or community opportunity to purchase. And it's when a city passes a policy that allows for tenants to buy their building, if say their property manager is selling the building, or it allows, in the case of COPA, the community opportunity to purchase, allows an affordable housing developer or a community land trust to buy that building and to make sure that the folks in that building can stay at an affordable price. So for example, this is just some language that we've kind of developed for our housing element messaging guide. And it's something that you might see some of your local advocates use. So when a landlord decides to sell a multifamily building, that can cause a sudden emergency for everyone in that place. It upends their lives. And even if they're lucky enough to find a place that's affordable, they're often forced to pay moving costs. So tenant community opportunity to purchase, also known as COPA policies, would prevent this kind of disruption when a building is sold. And it's simple, it's effective, it can protect renters, and it creates the stability that improves our whole community. And that allows us to be able to invest in ourselves, and it means that we can all benefit. So this is just one example of a language that we think is effective at convincing decision makers and at also explaining something that might be complicated or might seem complicated to folks that don't do this work day in, day out. Just a simple message, and it gets the point across in 2 paragraphs. So you can keep it even simpler. You can just say, hey, good evening. My name is Janae Aubrey, and I live and work in Santa Rosa. My landlord is selling my apartment building, and I can barely afford the rent right now. I'm worried that I won't be able to find another affordable place. And I really do think our community needs a housing plan that protects residents like me from being displaced and priced out of my community. So that's why I urge you to include a COPA policy in your housing element plan. Thank you so much for listening and considering my request. This sample public comment is pretty much similar to what I use. It can be simple. You don't have to read paragraphs and paragraphs. You don't have to write paragraphs and paragraphs. You can convey your message and it can be short and sweet like this. You don't have to use fancy or formal language. You don't have to do hours of research. It's okay to share your personal story. I think it's more effective than just providing statistics or data. So that's just a few examples. I want to keep it short and sweet because I know we have a panel right after this, but just wanted to give you all a heads up that we have even more information in our housing element messaging guide that's available on our website. We have a training on how to use our messaging guide. I can share the link in the chat. There's a recording of that training and the whole slide deck is available for all of you to use. And also coming soon, more videos like the one that I showed you, just explaining what the housing element is and just providing examples of what you can do or what you can say to get involved. And some flyers that you can maybe use and pass out to friends and family and neighbors, and then some sample social media posts if you would like to do that. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to your questions and your comments.
Thank you so much, Janae. And I would just like to, I think say that, yeah, these trainings that the MPH has been providing are absolutely wonderful and have been incredibly informative for me. So I strongly encourage everyone to take the opportunity to review those. And I'd be happy and delighted to share those as a follow-up to our evening's discussion. With that, I'm going to actually transition us to the question answer discussion part of our webinar. And the first one that we have here that received a fair amount of likes is, and this might be for either Aaron or Janae, I'll let you guys weigh in, but what kind of things cause rejection of all those SoCal housing elements that we can learn from and then possibly avoid as we proceed with our own housing elements? And feel free, either one of you, to jump in.
I have actually, HCD recently did a presentation to some Bay Area cities about exactly that question. And I have the slide deck from that. Big picture, I think a lot of the Southern California cities honestly didn't entirely take this process seriously. The housing element in the past has been kind of a perfunctory box checking process, where there hasn't been real accountability toward, is this going to be effective to meet our housing needs? And that is something that the state is really trying to change this cycle. And SoCal went first, so I think they were not entirely prepared for the new rigor of the process. A few things that HCD has identified, housing elements that don't support their assumptions. I think that is particularly in the sites inventory, where you have to actually justify why non-vacant sites are viable for redevelopment. And then two that are related are analysis that seeks to support existing conditions rather than guide solutions, and programs that uphold the status quo. Current conditions in California aren't working for our housing needs. And so if you come out with a housing element that doesn't create meaningful change in your city's approach to develop your permitting process, zoning, funding mechanisms, enforcement mechanisms for renter rights, like if you don't make meaningful change in those areas, how can you claim that you're going to be meeting our housing needs? Because the status quo clearly doesn't do that. So I think that's a big thing for cities is, I know it's uncomfortable sometimes to make big changes, but you got to do it. And then the last big piece has been cities that have not done enough to engage the public, and particularly to engage underrepresented communities in the process. That's something that HCD is also looking for.
Okay, it looks like Janae's not anything, so we'll move on. One of the things I actually was hoping one of you would elaborate on, we have this great organization, as I'm sure you're mildly familiar with, known as YIMBY Law. I'm wondering if one of you would be so kind as to elaborate as to what they do, what their purpose is, and how they kind of feed into the housing element process.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one too. I think work very closely with YIMBY Law. Well, they're a separate organization. I'll just be clear. I think there are a lot of different YIMBY groups, but YIMBY Law is a group that sues cities that are violating state housing law, and they're particularly interested in the housing element process because there are a lot of laws that some cities would prefer not to comply with in this process, and it creates conditions as well, when cities rezone a site or identify it as a housing opportunity site in their housing element, that then creates obligations for them in terms of how they approve applications for development on those sites. So YIMBY Law has been watching this process closely. They're one of a number of organizations. The first housing element lawsuits I'm aware of were actually filed by different organizations, Californians for Home Ownership. They've sued 6 cities in Southern California because their housing elements are out of compliance with state law, and they're asking those cities to make adjustments to come into compliance with state law. So enforcement of the housing elements can happen through lawsuits like that. It can happen directly through HCD. They have a housing accountability unit. That's their job, is to help make sure cities are following state law. And it can happen through the Attorney General's office. So I believe the Attorney General's office is suing Encinitas or Coronado in San Diego. It's Coronado, I think, in San Diego County, because Coronado has decided that actually they weren't going to complete a housing element. That was more of a guideline than a rule. And it's been a year now. So I think they're due for a lawsuit.
That's funny. Here's one for both of you, and you know, either one of you can speak up. But if anyone here that's with us today in the audience, if they want to take a deeper dive into the kinds of policies that can be advanced in this process, are there certain online resources that you would recommend that would help them be better prepared and to bring forward I think a little bit more insight when they come to speak their mind?
Yeah, I'll take that question. I think one great example is our friends at Public Advocates. They've worked with many advocates across the Bay Area. They have a housing element working group, and they have this new website called housingelementtools.org, and I'm happy to put that in the chat as well, where they work together to create different policy toolkits, like for specific policies, like Topa Copa, for example. There's an entire toolkit of explaining what it is, why it's important, its impact, and then also has some talking points for folks to use if they want to advocate for Topa Copa policies in their jurisdictions. And then also HCD. HCD has a lot of information on their website explaining what the housing element is, what RENA is, although I think Erin did an amazing job. But if you want to dig in even more, I think it'd be worthwhile to look at their website. They have videos, they have webinars, there's all kinds of information.
Yeah, I'll plug 2 more resources. One, the Campaign for Fair Housing Elements, coalition of a number of groups working together in this process. They have a lot of great resources in terms of policies to recommend, and also just like how to get involved as a volunteer in the housing element process. Some of the things that Janae talked about, and they have some resources to help you do that. The other thing that if we have people who are like on planning commissions or city staff, I will particularly recommend this to you. HCD has a pro-housing city designation program that has a whole menu of policies that they recommend that you adopt to be a pro-housing city. There are benefits to cities from securing that designation. You get advantages for grant applications. It makes to me a tremendous amount of sense to align the policies and programs in your housing element with the policies and programs suggested to become a pro-housing city. And then once you've completed your housing element, ta-da, you're a pro-housing city, and you get all the benefits that come with that.
It's timely you mentioned the pro-housing designation. That's something that, here at Generation Housing, we're very eager to get involved with, especially with some of our local jurisdictions who are actually very eager to advance progressive policies. Not all of them, but some of them are really moving forward and are really interested in, securing or having access to greater funding streams. And the pro-housing designation is certainly a good avenue to achieve that. Another question we received is, are jurisdictions that are mostly affluent and white required to engage underrepresented non-city residents nearby, or just their own residents? And I think I understand the context of this question. We have a community, city of Sonoma, and they're located next to a community that's known as Boys Hot Springs, that is in the unincorporated parts of our community. And I think I'm guessing that's what that's alluding to. So I'm wondering if you could just maybe provide us some information, or if you have anything, in your knowledge bank that could help us.
I would encourage them to do that, to engage people who are not currently able to live in the community, particularly people who work in the community who can't live there, which are often, there are ways to reach those populations.
And I'd also like to add, I believe ACD has a whole memo on community engagement. It is a requirement, they're legally required to do it. And then also adding on, Aaron, you did a great job of explaining what the affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement is. And I think to actually meaningfully conduct that analysis, you do need to talk to folks that are outside of these wealthier and mostly white communities.
So I actually just thought of a question in this moment, because it's actually something I haven't previously thought about. But if said community, Boys Hot Springs, were to be annexed by the city of Sonoma during the 6th cycle, would then they be under the housing element for the city of Sonoma, or would they remain in the housing element for the county of Sonoma until the 6th cycle's completion?
I think in terms of the planning process, it would be wherever they are when the housing element is written. But then if they get annexed into the city, they become subject to that city's land use policies.
Interesting, because that is something that could actually be happening. One of the other questions that I have for you guys today is, are any jurisdictions including financing plans in their housing elements, and specifically financing ADUs, whether adding, new construction or remodeling existing house to create a junior ADU? It's really difficult for most homeowners. Government bonds for this person, are they laid out in the housing element? What can we expect in terms of funding streams?
Is that something you've seen, Janae?
Something I've seen, but I know that's something that is being advocated for in San Mateo County by HLC, Housing Leadership Council. But I'm not actually sure if that's actually made it into any of those counties or cities' plans.
I'm trying to think. I was looking at the Chico housing element recently, and I know they talked about trying to encourage ADUs to provide support for ADUs being rented out at more affordable rates. Big picture, funding is absolutely something that cities should be talking about in their housing element. And, there are a lot of different ways you can deploy that money. The state also has a program, I believe, to provide through CalHome, CalHSA, to provide funding for low and moderate income homeowners to build ADUs. So that's something the city could try to help those homeowners take advantage of, where you can get that low interest loan. But yeah, I think cities should be looking at how can they raise local revenue to support affordable housing, and then what are ways that they can use it, including both development of subsidized affordable housing, but also they could be looking at renter assistance. They could be looking at that type of ADU program. And some of that stuff you can set up, like the ADUs, you could set up a revolving fund, but I think maybe administration at the state level might be easier for most cities, or the county level.
I saw in the chat that our very own Renee Champ, who is the executive director for Napa Sonoma ADU, chimed in and actually provided some input on that. And we are very fortunate that Redwood Credit Union, one of our local credit unions, has been very progressive, very helpful in trying to essentially establish a loan product that can get people underway with putting an ADU, a JADU, or colloquially what most people refer to as a granny unit in their backyards. It's definitely picked up pace in recent years. A lot of people are looking at multi-generational living as an opportunity to really survive and thrive in Sonoma County, given existing market conditions. And I also see that Renee was kind enough to drop some recs that she generated pertaining to what we should incorporate into our housing elements as it relates to ADUs and JADUs. So we're very thankful to have her here, and very thankful for all the work that she's done. It's really just incredible. One of the questions we also have here is, what is the timeline for housing element process in terms of when jurisdictions should have first drafts into HCD? This person actually recently heard there was a change where HCD will turn around comments on second drafts more quickly, which means first drafts can be submitted a bit later than initially believed. And they're just wondering if that can be confirmed right now.
I haven't heard anything about that change. I know a lot of cities are targeting this summer for their first draft, which gives them time to about 2 months for HCD to respond, and then gives them a couple of months to revise the draft. They need to provide 30 days for the public to comment on that revised draft, and then they would be trying to submit in January of 2023 a final draft. I would definitely encourage cities to not delay on this, because there is no guarantee your second submission will be approved by HCD. So, you know, yeah, I would say don't delay it. Also, like, I don't know, I've been hearing some consultants who are telling cities, don't worry, you don't need to worry about these crazy activists, or they don't know what they're talking about, and I do. I would encourage cities to really push back on that, because, you know, HCD is really taking a much more rigorous look at what cities are doing than they have in the past.
Another question we have pertaining to the pro-housing designation is, how does the pro-housing designation that, Sonoma County is actually pursuing, as is Rohnert Park and a few other of our jurisdictions, how does that relate to the provisions in the HE? Could you elaborate a little bit more on what specifically the pro-housing designation is looking for us to achieve as a community in order to qualify?
I can say, so one, a city has to have a certified housing element in order to qualify for that pro-housing designation. And then two, the biggest thing I would say is there's a whole menu of policies in that pro-housing designation that, cities can pick from. If cities want that pro-housing designation, they should be putting policies from that menu into their housing element, so that they're committing to make those policy changes that will make them a pro-housing city.
And from what I've gathered, based off my own personal observations and kind of cursory research, the pro-housing designation, there's a variety of criteria, and so long as you reach the threshold of 30 points, you qualify. And like an example of one of the things you can do is you create innovative, financial mechanisms that can, for example, as we were discussing earlier, that can support, ADUs or the proliferation of ADUs in your community. Another policy that I think that's built into the criteria is, finding ways to streamline ADUs, multifamily units, etc. That gets you like another 2 points. There's a whole menu of options and things that you can pick and pull from. So long as you reach that 30-point threshold, you will qualify. And as an aside, but related, Sacramento, I think it was like a month or so ago, was I think the first jurisdiction to qualify for the pro-housing designation. So they are well on their way to accessing more funding streams and ultimately, I think setting themselves up for greater success in the long term. Oh wow, we have a whole long list of questions popping up here. What has been the most effective in getting jurisdictions to honor their housing elements? Lawsuits like the HCD, maybe the Housing Accountability Unit, that's relatively new, so we're still waiting to see how that plays out. Maybe the Attorney General. Have either of you had any observations in recent months, based off of what's happening in SCAG?
What do you think, Janae? I think we need it all. We have I've heard examples from previous cycles of private lawsuits having, great results in cities. The attorney general is like the biggest gun, so to speak, like that has the heaviest firepower and the most resources, honestly. But also is, private entities are often willing to be a little more aggressive than the attorney general's office. So there are advantages to both of those.
For sure, and I'm media attention. I think there's been a lot of news lately about the housing element process, and I'm even thinking about the Mountain Lion case here in the Bay Area. Of course, the Attorney General wrote a letter about it, but I think that was mostly because of all the media attention.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
That was Woodside or Woodland?
Woodside.
Woodside, that's right.
Yeah. I think we definitely see that both HCD, the Attorney General's office, and the Governor's office are all, they read the news and they're on social media. And when stuff really blows up in those places, they pay attention. So if you see your city doing something absolutely ridiculous in their housing element, whether that's like saying, oh, we're going to build an apartment building on this cemetery, which is a real thing that has happened. Like putting a spotlight on that is valuable.
For greater context, the Woodside case was a community trying to subvert state law, specifically SB 9, by claiming that they're a mountain lion sanctuary. That did not fly, and they were publicly ridiculed across the state, and I'm sure even farther than that. So it was a really great light that they shined on the state of California, but it was amusing nonetheless. One of the questions we have here, it's a little bit hyper local, but what, generally speaking, have you seen ADUs kind of being classified as in terms of like area median income? I mean, in Sonoma, this person has noticed that the local planning commission has said that affordable by design is impossible. So therefore, ADUs should be classed as an above moderate unit. Looks like Aaron actually has some thoughts on that.
I just think that's a very clever argument. ADUs are something where HCD has put out pretty clear guidance, both on how cities should project ADU production totals, but also mostly what I've seen is that counties have done a survey of ADU rents, and they've used that to say, this percentage are moderate income and this percentage are affordable at low income, and that's being used for the projections. And that's, HCD has approved that methodology. I don't know if Sonoma County has done that survey.
That's great to know. So I guess one final question actually for the both of you before we move on to the next section is, if there was 3 things that you wanted people to take away from today, what would those be? What are the most important things that people should remember, when recalling this webinar? It's a broad one.
I think for me, it's really the urgency and opportunity of this moment, and the importance of sharing your personal story. The fact that you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to be policy nerds like Aaron and I and Cal. You can just keep it simple. And also, please share what you're learning and the resources that we're sharing with other people.
Yeah, I would say this is an incredible opportunity to shape the future of housing policy in your community. That your input is really important for holding cities accountable, and that there's a whole apparatus designed to hold cities accountable to producing plans that are good, but it can't function without your help. And so when you help make those wheels turn and like provide the context and information, you are pulling on a big lever. This is a moment of incredible leverage. So I hope you'll jump into it. And politics is always a team best as a team sport. So connect with your fellow housing advocates, connect with Generation Housing. I am happy to talk with you as well, but I mean, you got some great resources on the ground here there with Gen H, who know Sonoma County better than I do. So that's the other thing I would say is, you don't have to do it alone.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both. This has been delightful. And I'm, again, just ever so grateful that you joined us tonight. Folks, we're not done yet, so stick with us. Indeed, strength in numbers. I just want to, transition really briefly and let, myself and Ramon touch on a couple things. And first, I just like to say that, so we do know, I have confirmed with the staff of the planning staff of the city of Santa Rosa that we can be expecting their draft housing element inside the next week or so. They will be the first to release their draft, and we're very much looking forward to seeing what sort of creative policies they are bringing forward. In terms of other jurisdictions, we've heard from the city of Sonoma and a few others that we're going to be expecting their drafts in July, and then it looks like there's going to be some in August as well. I'd like to actually quickly plug the Napa Sonoma Collaborative. The Napa Sonoma Collaborative is a shared effort among the region's jurisdictions to help address the region's housing challenges. The jurisdictions really, by working together collaboratively, are going to save time, money, resources by, really sharing information and capacity. And the goal is to maintain and facilitate relationships, with housing advocates and key governmental organizations. And they're not a nonprofit, they're not an organization, but really they're just a group of staff from all across Napa County and Sonoma County jurisdictions. And they have found they can do more together than apart when it comes to housing policy. And so we're really happy to have them, or have our collective communities closely communicating with one another. And if you give me one moment, I will drop that right here in the chat. And I strongly encourage you actually to visit their website. Under the resource section, you can actually find a link. It's the Get Involved section. Then you go to Connect to Your Community. You can find a link to all your jurisdictions' housing element pages. And by and large, they have timelines available. They have presentations, a bunch of other resources. And those are really the go-to pages for the most up-to-date information. So I would strongly encourage that you visit their website just to get to know more. I mean, has a plethora of resources available that can really help get you even more oriented to the housing element process. And with that, I'm gonna let Ramon take the reins briefly just to describe kind of what we're planning at Generation Housing in terms of our community organizing over the next few months.
Thank you very much, Callum. So I would like to repeat what Janae said. I love that comment. You are the expert on your community's housing needs. That is so true. We need everybody. You know your neighborhood. You know what's going on. You know what properties can be developed or shouldn't be developed. So you need to speak up. So we need you. We need you to join us, become a member of one of our other organizations. We're very lucky to be working with other organizations in different cities, but we need everybody's help. And so in the future, just like I said, if you become a member, you can come to our house parties, you can come to our webinars like this, and it will be great to start having more let's get togethers. Let's do happy hour. Let's do maybe, suppers. Let's create community by caring about how things are happening, what is going on, and how can we together make a difference. So I'm inviting you to if you're not a member, become a member. So I think that's the wrap up for that. Did I miss anything?
Thanks. And as we kind of briefly touched upon, but I'm just going to elucidate a little bit more. So once a draft is released, the public has 30 days to review and provide comment before it is then sent to the state or the Housing and Community Development Department, HCD, for a 90-day review period. So then towards the end of 2022, these drafts come back to our communities and HCD will provide their feedback. They might reject or accept the drafts, at which point modifications will be needing to be made. But they will then proceed to public hearings with your local city council and commissions. And so you'll have additional opportunities to really weigh in. And that's where, as Ramon was, I think getting as, we really need you activated. We really need you to join us to provide your thoughts, your input. These communities, and we would love to pick your brains, to hear your thoughts, and to really be the resource that helps us move our respective jurisdictions forward as we create the policies for the next decade that guide housing. So more on that will be coming. I dropped into the chat a link to our action alerts. So you can actually sign up for specific alerts from individual jurisdictions, and we'll bring you together and we'll work and meet up. As Ramon said, we can sit down over beers and we can review these drafts together. We're more than happy to be a guiding resource for you, and we very much look forward to having you participate and get engaged with us. And before all of you check out for the evening, we just have one more section and just a little bit more information to impart upon you. And so I'm actually going to hand things over to Stephanie now.
Thank you, Cal. And thank you one more time to our panelists, Janae and Aaron, for sharing your institutional knowledge and all of your experience. We really appreciate you taking the time. And before we close the program and before you leave, we just have a few items. Please do stick around till the end because we are offering a membership special that I think you'll be interested in. But first, we'd like to get feedback from each of you. If it's worth doing, if it's worth evaluating. And to that end, I am going to launch our poll. And if you would please kindly answer, I think we have three questions tonight. Did you find this webinar informative? Did you find it inspiring? And how likely are you to recommend or share with a friend or colleague? So if you could take a couple moments to fill that out. And while you're doing that, I just want to share that we will be following up this event with an email with a link to the recording of the event, as well as all of the resources that were shared. So much was shared in the chat. I've been copying everything and we'll put it in an email. The slides that were shared, the links that were shared. So if you missed anything, don't worry, we will send it in an email. And if you want to share the event with a colleague or friend, it will be posted to our YouTube channel in the next couple days. And if you have any other feedback or questions or thoughts, please go ahead and send them to us to info@generationhousing.org. And I hope that after today, we're all inspired to take some sort of action and participate in this process. And thank you again to everyone in our audience who joined us tonight. And I would like to give a special thank you to everyone who joined, who are members of Generation Housing. And I'm going to share my screen. And so just a thank you to our members. Our work is powered by over 200 members who stand by with us. Where together we say yes to housing. Our work isn't possible without your support and participation. And if you are not a member, I'd really like to encourage you to become a member tonight as well. The link to do so will be provided in the chat momentarily. And because we really want to see everyone here tonight move to action, we are offering a time-limited membership special. When you sign up to become a member tonight using the code EQUITY, we will mail you a copy of The Color of Law. This is a fantastic read, and I also encourage you to watch our event, which is posted on our YouTube channel with the author of the book, Richard Rothstein. This is a really important read, especially in connection with the housing elements. about how housing policies put in place by our government have real life impacts. Those can be used for good, or they can be used to segregate and exclude. So again, use the code equity when you sign up to become a member, and we will mail you a copy of the book. Thank you to all of our catalyzing members who continue to support our work and help keep the momentum rolling. And thank you to our founders who made a really critical investment at our beginning and taking a leap of faith with Generation Housing. And lastly, before you go, we'd like to invite all of you to attend our upcoming summer events, our June house party, which will take place on Thursday, June 16th. This is our monthly membership gathering. If you aren't a member, please come as a guest and we'll convince you that membership is right for you. And in July, don't miss our Youth and Housing Town Hall, which will be an online webinar featuring youth voices on their concerns, hopes, and vision for housing in Sonoma County. And that will take place on Thursday, July 21st. You can register at generationhousing.org/events. And with that, one more thank you to all of our presenters and to everyone who attended tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.